Starting in the 1970s, Ed Deci and Richard Ryan, two psychologists at the University of Rochester, developed the basis for what's now called self-determination theory, a comprehensive theory of human motivation, which through many studies has been able to show that people are not necessarily always motivated by rewards. And in fact, intrinsic motivation is a more powerful and more effective way to encourage people to act in certain ways. Under self-determination theory, there's actually a spectrum of motivational types. So if we could draw three categories here, at this end of the spectrum is what they call amotivation. And what that means is you have no motivation one way or the other. You are totally indifferent to the activity. That's called being amotivated. At the other end of the spectrum is intrinsic motivation. Here, you do the thing for no reason other than that you love it. You do the thing because it is rewarding in and of itself. That's the strongest form of motivation because it takes nothing external at all to get you to do the activity. So this is what we find in a really great game. You're not doing it for money, you're not doing it for fame, you're not doing it for status, you're doing it because it's fun. In the middle, there is the broad category of extrinsic motivators. And what self-determination theory says is that there's actually a spectrum from the most external to the most internal forms of extrinsic motivation. So all the way over here, closest to amotivation, the most external, they call external regulation. And I know my handwriting leaves something to be desired here. But the idea here is at this point, you really don't want to do something, or maybe you're indifferent to it. The only thing that makes you do it is someone tells you to. Someone else says, do this, and you do it simply because you feel like you have to. You have no perceived locus of control, as psychologists talk about. There's no you in wanting to do this thing. It's just doing it for some external cause. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad or it doesn't mean that motivation never works, but it does mean there is no sense of doing it because you personally value it, which makes that motivation less powerful. The second category they talk about, they call introjection. And the idea here is sometimes we take external motivators and make them our own. So this is typically where we would find status, which, as we talked about, is an important kind of motivator in behaviorist, operant conditioning type approaches to gamification. Status says, I may not really want to do this, but other people will value me. They'll think I'm cool. They will like me. So I'm going to do it for that reason. So it's something about me. It's not saying I'm doing it purely for those other people, but it's saying I am introjecting. I'm taking their view about status and somehow appropriating it to make me want to do the thing. Next in line, they call identification. And the idea here is, at this point, I've taken the external motivator and I've somehow made it my own. It's not just because other people will think I'm cool. It's because I can see some value in it. I don't really enjoy learning math, but I can see that knowing something about math is important to success in modern business and the modern economy, so I'll do it. It somehow is aligned with my own personal goals. I can somehow logically say there's value to me in doing this, but I still don't really want to. And then finally, the closest to intrinsic motivation they call integration. And here, there's a complete alignment internally between my goals and the thing. This is, for example, the way many people feel about exercise. I really want to exercise. It's good for me. I know I should do it. I can say, yeah, I want to exercise. And yet, I don't like exercising. It's just not fun for me. I still need some push. I still won't do it just because of love of the thing itself. And then finally, when we get all the way to this end and intrinsic, the activity has reached that stage where it's worthwhile and motivating in and of itself. Now, takeaway here for gamification, all of these may be relevant in a gamified system. The ideal is something that people just love doing for its own sake, but that's not necessarily realistic in every context. So the question is how to utilize these different kinds of motivation appropriately for the situation, and how to push generally towards approaches that are more dependent on intrinsic motivation. The more that this is something the person really wants to do for themselves, and it has to be authentic. It's not that you've tricked them into thinking they love doing something. It's that they actually love doing it and find some meaning in it. They find the fun in the activity, going back to Mary Poppins. The more you can get towards that direction of the spectrum, the better. So what does it actually take to make something intrinsically motivating? And this is at the heart of self-determination theory. Under self-determination theory, there are 3 characteristics of intrinsic motivation. 3 factors that, when they are present, suggest that an activity will be worthwhile to people in and of itself. And this has been tested in study after study, domain after domain, including with regard to video games. So the 3 characteristics are the following. The first one is competence, which has to do with the person's sense of ability, their sense that they are accomplishing something, solving problems, surmounting obstacles. They are achieving something within the activity. The second one is autonomy, which says the person feels like they're in control. I'm the one making the choices. It's not someone else telling me to do this. It's me doing it by my own free choice, meaningful choices. And the third one is relatedness. And by this, Deci and Ryan means something like your activity is connected to something beyond yourself. That could be some sense of meaning or purpose. It could be, I am doing this because I'm using less energy and that's good for the planet. It could be, I'm doing this because it will help my company and I believe in my company and want to be a good team player in the organization. Or it could be, I'm doing this with friends. Social interaction is an element of relatedness, which we see a great deal with regard to games. So let's look at one example quickly from a gamified site and how some of the standard kinds of game elements we've talked about can activate these 3 motivators of intrinsic motivation under self-determination theory. And the point here is that game elements are not necessarily one or the other. It's not that a badge is inherently an external motivator or inherently an internal motivator. It can be one or the other depending on the context and the way that it's applied. So these examples are about a site called Fitocracy, a site to encourage people to exercise, to work out, and to get into shape. And Fitocracy uses all of the standard kinds of PBL type game elements we've seen, but they do it in a fairly coherent, sophisticated way, which is really targeted towards intrinsically motivating people to engage in the activity. So first here, this is what happens on Fitocracy when you level up. You get a certain number of points, standard game element. It says you level up, you're now at level 3, and here's the badge that you get for leveling up. But notice how this is all integrated together. It's not just you've leveled up. It's congratulations. You've earned it. Earning, i.e. a sense of competence that you've done something hard that got you to that next level. You're now level 3, awesome. And the click button says, I'm awesome. And you can share it with your friends to tell them how awesome you are. And this is part of the overall structure of this site. It really wants to make you feel good about yourself when you exercise. And it wants you to see this as a challenge, and a challenge that when you overcome some of those challenges, when you start to tag and report your workouts and start to move up in how effective your workouts are, that means you are leveling up, not just in some abstract sense, but you are getting better. You're getting into better shape. So that's all about competence. And again, it's in how the site is designed to make the person feel that their activity is achieving something, mastering something, as opposed to just doing something for no particular reason. Second one is autonomy. And here, typically in games and gamification, the issue is choices. How much freedom does the user have? The games that are heavily structured and scaffolded, where you have two choices, but the game will push you to just one choice, and there's very little freedom within those choices, tend to activate less autonomy than the more sandbox type game environments, where the user has lots of scope for choice. And within gamification, when services give users lots of options, choose your own adventure, decide where you go, that tends to activate more autonomy. So here we see on Photocracy, you get to choose your interests, and you get to custom build what sets of challenges that you have based on the kinds of workouts you want to engage in. And some of them are group, some of them are individual. The point is, your decisions about which path you want to take customize the site so you feel like the experience is one that you are in control of. It's not telling you cardio is what matters. You get to choose that. And then once you make those choices, it gives you a whole set of different potential quests. So it's not just that you need to engage in one type of workout. Here's a whole bunch of different workouts. This one's only worth 10 points. This one's worth 300. But obviously the first one's a lot easier. So you get to make choices and trade off what's more important to you. Autonomy. The decisions are in the control of the player, not predetermined across the board by the game. Finally, relatedness. Here in Photocracy, we see a very strong social element. It's better with friends, recruit your friends, help keep each other motivated. Here's a pop-up that you see some other people on the site, and it'll recommend people you follow. Here's groups. You can join together with groups that are interested in particular kinds of workouts, who have particular kinds of questions. The whole experience is structured very much around you're not in this alone. This is not just about you sitting in a gym or in your basement and lifting weights. This is about some activity that you engage in with a community. It's bigger than you. That's relatedness. So 3 good examples of applying self-determination theory to make a gamified site, even one using the standard PBL elements, feel more intrinsically motivating. If you're interested in more on self-determination theory, 2 good books to recommend. One is a book called Drive by Daniel Pink, and this is a kind of business popularization of self-determination theory. He recounts the history of the work by Desi and Ryan, and then shows how this kind of approach can be applied in business and gives some great examples of companies that are using these kinds of intrinsic motivators for great success. Really well-written book if you want to understand how these concepts apply in business. It's not about gamification per se, but it's very relevant to the discussions that we have in this course. The second one is by Richard Ryan and a co-author, Scott Rigby, and it is specifically applying self-determination theory to video games. It's called Glued to Games, and it shows some of their research on specifically how video games can activate these 3 motivators of self-determination theory. So ideally, every gamification implementation should be based on some attempt to engage these aspects of intrinsic motivation, which self-determination theory outlines.